Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cutrer, Rachel Cutrer, and Keaton Dodd.
Thank you all for joining us in another episode of the Over the Hump podcast. Today, myself, Brandon Cutrer, and Jimmy Sartwelle sit down and discuss the pros and cons of fertility in Brahman and how to maintain selection to try to improve these traits in your cattle. Hope you enjoy.
We'd like to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Over the Hump podcast. And we liked him so much the first time that we decided to go ahead and bring Mr. Jimmy Sartwelle back for another round. And so me and Brandon are here and going to go ahead and interview Jimmy. And we want to lead in and talk, Jimmy, if you would, just a little bit about some of your experiences with TJBA. And so I guess let's unpack this week's activities and then go into even maybe a little bit of history of the TJBA and the TJBA State Show.
Oh, we had a fantastic week in Bryan. Showed a little bit more than 530 head of cattle through the ring, 215, 16 exhibitors. But just a tremendous group. Had our biggest F1 show we've ever had at 34 F1s through the ring. Had about 150 bred and owned cattle, which is always gratifying as a breeder to see that these kids are truly bit with the bug, at least enough to maintain a female through all the trials and tribulations of getting her bred and keeping her bred, having a calf. Hopefully the calf's good enough to show. But also, as I look through those sires, and I had Digital Beef open for lots of the bred and owned show, seeing the genetics that some of our breeders had made available to these kids to use it's about half heartwarming actually to know that we've got a lot of folks that are putting their money where their mouth is in terms of supporting the kids. This was our 49th TJBA State Show, and it's kind of ironic. I'm here in studio with you guys in Wharton County today, about 10, 12 miles away from where this association was organized in 75 down at Johnny Joyce's. They organized in 75, had their first show in 76, so it's just one of those real weird kind of mathematical things that only economists like me fall in love with, is that this was both our 49th anniversary and our 49th show. And it was as good as any that have come along. I've been at every TJBA since 1983 as an exhibitor, and then as an arena director since 89. It is as good now as it ever was, and probably honestly better than it ever was. Like, we're providing more opportunities through more leadership contests or leadership activities to the kids, but it remains what it's always been, an opportunity for young Brahman enthusiasts to get together in a kind of a low stress environment and get to know the people that are going to be their friends the rest of their lives. So looking forward to our 50th anniversary show next year in June in Bryan. And those TJBA alumni and parents who are listening to this, who had kids participate in years back, you need to be watching TJBA Facebook and probably watching your email and seeing if we can't really put a big family reunion together 12 months from now to celebrate the 50th anniversary. It'll be a big deal.
Well, I know directly after the show was over, Brandon called me, and he was probably as excited about just the quality of a judging job after watching Dr. Todd Thrift sort through those cattle as maybe he's ever been since we've been friends. And so either one of y'all wanted to elaborate on that, but just kind of what y'all thought of the cattle, the show, how Dr. Thrift did, all those kind of things.
Yeah, I tell you, just backing up to the beginning of the week, and TJBA in general, the TJBA State Show, it's one of my favorite shows of the year and has become that over the last few years since Molly's been showing. This is she's 13 now. She started when she was 8, like her 5th one. And they've always been great, but they seem to get better and better every year. Not only just being laid back, fun environment for the kids that's centered around the kids, but also extremely well organized. And it seems like every year things get easier and easier because of the good organization. It's got to where now I'm sure, I don't know exactly who's behind it. Maybe Jimmy can fill us in, but evening meals, whether it's Whataburger or pizza or something, to the free ice, which is awesome because I don't have to leave the grounds and go to get ice at the convenience store or anything like that. And if anybody knows Rachel, especially our show crew, they know if there's not ice in the ice chest, heads are going to roll. So that's just wonderful. But the leadership contest and everything, just seeing it in my own kids, the growth that Molly has had because of TJBA and a lot of the leadership and the support system that TJBA offers has been phenomenal in the way she's grown in the leadership contest and just her abilities and her drive to want to do better each and every time. But I tell you, this year, Annie joined us, and she always kind of joins us in a lot of stuff, but this is the year where Annie just seemed she might have had the best TJB of anybody, because she, in the morning when she'd get there, she'd start running and playing, and she wouldn't quit till it was time to go. And I don't know if there's anybody that sweated more than Annie did and had more fun as Annie did, but I think if she found some friends and she jumped in there with them and took off and went on about that. And she also, I think, would even jump in and help in the office from time to time, or she might have been in the way she said she was helping.
No, she was helping.
And set up for the banquet. But anyways, I love it. It's a fantastic show, and the organization of it has just been fantastic. And I know that you and Beth and your family, from Miss Shuggy to Miss Ruth and Brock and Lavinia and everybody that get in there and do that, we sure appreciate all the effort and the service that goes into that to make it a fun event for everybody. But going into the show, I thought the judging was fantastic. No matter what show we were in, whether it was the F1 show or showmanship or the show itself, I thought it was judging from different points of view. But I think all the judges were giving their honest opinion. I don't know. Just for example, we had a good show. We could have had a better show. But the honest evaluation of a judge in every single show that we went to was just refreshing. It was wonderful. I don't think there was any funny business whatsoever, but it was so refreshing that I felt like I could follow each of the judges every time and know what they were going to and the preferences that they put on the different traits, and you knew that you were getting an honest evaluation. So it was a wonderful deal all the way through, end to end. Had a great week last week at the TJBA show.
Yeah, it's always a good thing when someone gets beat and they're still happy with the way that the cattle were sorted, because that's when you know that, like, a good, honest evaluation of how a judge did. If someone gets beat and still thinks that there was a good show and someone did a good job. And so I guess from this point, fellas, is where we kind of kick it into a different direction. We were kind of sitting around before we started even recording, just discussing what we were going to talk about on this podcast, and honestly kind of spurned us in a direction that wasn't necessarily where we were going to go. We were thinking, what are we going to call this? And we just did Unpacking Brahman Fertility. And so we just want to put y'all through what we talk about every day. I guess this is a normal conversation between me and Jimmy, or me and Brandon on the phone. And so we're just kind of putting a fourth person in the room to listen to kind of what we talk about on a daily basis. And so, Jimmy, you want to just kind of kick us off and tell us and lead us in a direction, I guess you'd say?
Well, I would just say this, and it's kind of funny. A lot of this discussion got kicked off from my standpoint. Brock was a green hand in FFA this year, and the speech that he wrote dealt with just kind of through 5 generations of our families with the Brahmins, kind of what were the challenges and the goals that J.W. Sartwelle had in the first generation. Kind of skip forward to my dad, about how that changed and how the core values don't change, and then what his and JD's goals are when they take this 105-year-old cow herd over someday when I'm not around. And he got asked a question at district FFA competition that he really couldn't answer, which was, what's your number one specific measurable goal? So between district and area competition, Brock said, I don't want to get caught with my pants down without a good answer to that question. I said, well, what's the most expensive thing that your bubby always told you the most expensive thing on the ranch is? And he said, well, it's an open cow. I said, all right, so what's your goal? He goes, I want to minimize open cows as much as possible, which gets down into a discussion that I had with him that Brandon and Keaton and I have all the time, which is, if you're going to set a goal, set a good one, but have it be measurable and have it be achievable, which is having a cow every 365 days. Where our discussion this morning started off was, if a Brahman cow's gestation is 290 days, and you want her to calf every 365 days, then your most important 75 days of the year as a manager are between calving and that date, and that 365th day, which begat a long discussion that we had, which we probably should have had the recorder running in, of what can we do from a management standpoint? Is it all genetic? Is it all management? What's the balance in there? But this really got planted in my mind of sitting there when you talk to a 15-year-old about, okay, well, if they ask how I'm going to carry that plan out, how are we going to have it? Well, we're going to have a Cadillac Animal Health program. We're going to have a good, affordable nutrition program, and we're going to do our best to center around the cattle that have proven in the past that they can mitigate environment, mitigate hot, cold, dry, lots of grass, not much grass. But my question to the genetic expert here was, how much of it is genetic? How much of it is management?
And then that led us in the direction of conversation that Brandon had with Dr. Charles Long. I'm sure anybody listening that's a fan of Brahman or just been around the industry in the state of Texas knows who he is. A fantastic researcher, rancher, cowman, all the above. But Brandon, kind of talk about what you discussed with Dr. Long and kind of his thoughts on Brahman's breeding more certain times of the year.
Yeah, so I forget exactly how the conversation got started with him. Maybe it was sometime around the national show this past November, and I was either getting ready to or had already set up my fall calving cows for AI. And we just broke into a discussion about breeding for fall calves and things like that. And he said, well, now the big majority of Brahman cows are going to shut down cycling December the 10th. And they're not going to pick back up until probably mid-February or something, early February, mid-February, depending on the weather. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, I think it might have something to do with day length and then also weather. And so thinking about that, it started really kicking in, started to dive down deeper within our own herd and start looking. And over the years, the hardest time to get cattle bred seems to be from that middle of December to middle of February mark. And I had never considered day length, but I'd always considered cold, wet weather. And so being environment and trying to manage around that and get those cattle bred either earlier or something like that really starts to come into play on the strategy that you want to use navigating the environment.
Okay, so I think this is kind of a challenging conversation to just organize, but where my head's at right now, I guess, would be Brandon, Jimmy, myself, I guess. Let's talk the folks through, if I wanted to get a set of cows on a 365-day calving interval, what are the things that I probably need to do from a management, a nutritional standpoint, things like that? Starting with age the cattle, when you start tinkering with them all the way through. And so y'all two both, I guess, kind of lead us in that direction. Brandon, I know we've been working really, really hard at getting heifers calving more consistently and calving intervals narrowed quite a bit. And so I guess you can kind of lead us that direction.
I guess just off the starting line, when do you want those heifers to calve? where you're not going to have problems calving them out and all that kind of stuff. When do you want to, kind of the ages of those heifers would be something to take into consideration. Yeah, it's not necessarily about when you breed them for the purpose of when you breed them, but when are you going to be calving those things out? So you look in a certain month, say April, and you're like, oh, these heifers are cycling good on this clover. Let's go ahead and breed these things. But then you don't think far enough ahead and say, I'm going to be calving in February when it's going to be 17 degrees outside and blowing snow. And that's when you set yourself up for disaster. So there's lots of things to consider when you're setting these things up and getting them ready to breed, to, I guess, basically set them up for success. They've got to be in a good nutritional setting in their own body. They've to wherever they'll get pregnant, maintain a pregnancy, and be healthy enough to calve out. But also, are they too fat? Are they not fat enough? You got to find that sweet spot where those cattle are optimum body condition to breed like they're supposed to. And then when you, like I said, thinking forward to when they're going to calve, but then also when you're going to get ready to rebreed those animals, because you don't want to say calve them out in December when you're looking to get those things bred back to calve 365. You're looking, you'll be calving those, you're breeding those things back in February, and you're running the same problem of cold, wet weather, and they're just not going to do it. So there's so many factors to take into consideration. The management side of this deal can get really, really hard.
Yeah,
what do y'all think?
We talked about it, and I'll let Jimmy carry on after I just dropped this kind of deal. We had talked about, well, how heritable is fertility truly? And my fallback's always the American Angus Association. I'm a Hereford breeder, so that's probably bad to say, but I always go flip back to their data just when I'm kind of trying to see what the industry is telling you. And of their traits that they evaluate on their EPDs, heifer pregnancy was the second lowest in heritability behind maternal milk. And so obviously a very lowly heritable trait. I think that kind of, I don't know, is it genetic? That's where we started. That's where we're at.
So you're saying the debate would be genetics versus environment, or the combination of the two?
And I think we all know that it is a combination of the two in some sense.
But to which degree, right?
Well, there's two parts of environment. There's the environment that you can mitigate with your management. It's droughty. There's nothing to eat. You can provide supplemental feed, supplemental mineralization, supplemental minerals, supplemental protein. You cannot manage your way around 9 degrees in February. You cannot manage your way out of 109 degrees in early June, like we were late May, like we had in South Texas just this year. One of our deals that differs Brahman from Angus or from Hereford or from any purebred Taurus, especially the English cattle, is age at puberty varies so much more in Brahman cattle than it does in those Taurus cattle that have been bred to a book for 200 and something years and did not have the inherent variability of the breed types that formed those breeds like we have with Brahmans. Because you can go back, the Gears, the Guzerats, and the Nellores, vastly different types of cattle, and we were still kind of figuring out in this country all the way up through Dr. Jacobs, kind of phasing out there in the 50s. We were still trying to, you could still go get a dose of Guzerat to stick in your cattle at that point in time. So I'm kind of wondering if part of our issue is age at puberty. Our good friend Lauren Pratt out in Arizona has a hard and fast rule. He does not put a bull. He said if her 2-year-old birthday is tomorrow, the bull does not go with her today. That he will not put one with them. I go back to stories that my dad and my grandfather told me about not putting the cows with the heifers with the bull till they were 3 back in the 20s and the 30s, and calving them is just short of 48 months for the first time because they didn't have any supplemental feeding, no minerals, no animal health program, no nothing. There was never a needle that went in them. I guess about the only management you could do is a sharp knife and make a bull a steer was really kind of about it. Hell, they didn't even dehorn cattle back then. So we've got a longevity angle in these cows that we play up. But it doesn't matter if she lives to be 20 if she only has 6 calves
That's right.
in 20 years.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'd prefer a 10-year-old cow that had 6
I
calves.
prefer a 10-year-old cow that still maintained her flesh. And on this market that we've got right now, when you can sell some fleshy 1,250, 1,300 pound cows for almost $2,000 a pop, it's a pretty good salvage value on that. And we all remember the little depreciation formulas that we learned in school. So I think it's also a question of if you've got to match the time of year to the age of the female, you can calve a Brahman heifer out at 22, 23 months all day long. It takes a magician to get her bred back. But why? Why does it take a magician to get that Brahman cow that calves the earlier she calves? Why does it seem that the probability of rebreeding back in the first breeding season?
I think this is the actual topic that we're talking about. It's not necessarily the challenge of getting her bred the first time. It's the getting her rebred is the challenge that we're all trying to figure out. But when you get her bred at the first time, I think is ultimately has as much to do with your ability to get her rebred on time. So I guess that's kind of where we're getting at.
Well, if your goal is a 365-day calving interval and you think you can hit it, you want to calve that cow the very first time, the very best day of the year to have a cow calve. And it's probably not when we customarily calve in a 60-day window in the fall, and it's really probably not a February, March. It might not be a February, March calf either, depending on how you're on the device by which, whether you're doing natural service or AI.
Yep. So backing up one set real quick, I think a lot of them maybe a misconception of longevity, I guess. Just because a Brahman cow can live to be 20 to 22 years old is cool, but if she's only productive every 18 months of that time, you'd be better off with something that lived a lot shorter that would really kick them out. Because there's still, no matter what, you have the fixed income costs each and every year of maintaining that cow, whether she produces or not. So if you've got a cow that's kicking them out consistently on a regular basis, every 365 or as close to it as possible, you're mitigating that fixed expense, I guess, and getting around that. But if she's 20 years old, she only calves every 18 months, that's not necessarily longevity. I think a better concept would be longevity mixed with productivity. I think that's something that we really need to pay attention to and make sure that we're keeping those two married together.
So what I was kind of unpacking before you went back that direction, and I think this is more of a question for all of us, but what do you think the number one factor is that inhibits a cow from breeding back? I mean, I know what I think it is, but we can all kind of discuss. My gut tells me it's fleshing ability or body condition. Okay, and so if that's the case, we think body condition, and this is just my own opinion, but if you think body condition score is the number one factor in a cow cycling and rebreeding, then, and we want that cow to be bred back 70 days post calving, then shouldn't we be trying to get these calves born roughly 70 days before the most prime grazing opportunity, or maybe 60 or 50 or whatever, so she's got some time to build up, right? So I don't know, when is that the number one time? Like, when is a cow at the spa? I mean, when is it good to be a cow? Well, April, June. I don't know. I mean,
you have people all over the country that listen to this, all over the world, and it's gonna be different.
Yeah, exactly.
It's gonna be different in different spots. Where I'm in South Texas, we're on sand. We've got people on heavier soil 10, 15 miles away from me. They can reliably get a winter pasture stand every year. And I mean, it looks like a golf course out there. I can't depend on it. So for people within 10, 15 miles of me in South Texas, an hour south of San Antonio, they may be their optimum time of the year, considering temperature in there, might be to calve November 1 every year. Where I am, I still think that's probably a pretty good time for me, because my issue with having a March-April calf like my dad aimed at in Sealy, Texas, forever and a day on improved coastal pasture that was fertilized every year and was a lot of the risk had been taken out there. An April calf in South Texas, that calf's going to see 100 degrees for the first time before he's a month old. He's not going to be under 85% humidity like he's going to be in Wharton County, but the difference is you can plan on when it's 100 degrees in Wharton County all summer, as long as you get a little bit of rain, you're going to have plenty of grass for him.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't count on that because I'm on straight sugar sand on 40% of the rain that y'all get up here. So I've actually moved away from a spring-based calving season till they miss. And then I kicked the bull back. Then I kicked the bull back out on them again, and I had calves born in 10 of the 12 months last year. Not the worst thing in the world, though, is she still made something. She's got to make something. Rachel Ann went to Michigan State. I went to Kansas State to get my master's. These two yo-hos stayed in the South the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was an extension specialist with Kansas State, on a straight Angus or Hereford or Black Baldy cow base, well, those guys were hard and fast about it. If she don't breed back, she's gone. The average Brahman breeder south of Scott Clayburg's old Bakersfield to Charlotte line, the 30th parallel, holy moly, if we did that, we might wind up with 4 cows before it's all said and done. And is it because she's an inferior cow? No. She's a heck of a lot better matched for her environment. She is as matched to her environment as that Black Baldy cow is at Scott City, Kansas. But there's some additional environmental pressures down here that aren't present. And you're not, I don't know. My biggest thing I always say, Keaton and Brandon, y'all heard me say this, is when you find yourself making excuses for a cow, you're probably already behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
You probably already missed an opportunity to ship her. But I think we've just called this almost mystical and attributed a whole lot more of it to genetics than needs to be. I think our management is across the board a whole lot more haphazard when it comes to managing the cow. Back to your question, Keaton, I think I would agree with you about what the number one of everything else, but assuming a good, solid animal health program is in place. And there's no trick issues. There's no leptovibrio issues. There's no venereal problems at play in your cow herd. Your ability to have that cow as body condition score 5 the day she calves. If she's a 4, she's probably going to go down pretty quick. And then you've got that battle between the energy requirements for maintenance and for lactation and just for her ability to cycle back. She comes into it as a 6 or a 7, you've probably wasted resources unless she just is a natural flesher 6 or a 7, which we all have a couple of.
Mm-hmm.
That's in there. I guess maybe the most important part of your nutrition program is to have that which is as close to body condition score 5 every day of the year as possible. Now, God equips you with some of them that can do that. Then God gives you the ability to feed some natural. I just think there's cows that are out there that are wired to be a certain condition score. Brahman cows,
I would agree to that.
That are wired to do that.
Yeah.
But you're pushing a rope on those cows that are, especially, they're probably a little bit larger frame because you wouldn't put up with a little smaller frame cow that doesn't flesh real good. But we look at that larger frame cow and we think, ooh, man, if she just put some cover on, man, she'd look great. But you're pushing a rope on that cow that's wired to be a 3, and we've all got some of them too. And those probably aren't the cows that when you look, the calf is close to an annual basis. Those probably.
Yeah, I mean, well, especially like you talked about, the environment that you're bringing those cattle up in. The reason probably the big cow is naturally predisposed to be a body condition score of 3 is there's not enough forage in your part of the world to support a cow of that size. We kind of talked about the difference in gestation length in Brahman cattle. I'm kind of spurring us in a different direction a little bit, but we talked about the difference in gestation length in Brahman cattle and the fact that on average, let's say roughly 10 days over their Boss Taurus counterparts, specifically like Angus or Hereford. And the challenge that has on making a 365-day calving interval possible. And we were talking about some of that earlier. And so not only do you have 10 days less to get them bred back in those 365 days, we talked about some of the other things that kind of attributed to too. So I don't know if anybody wanted to carry on from that direction, but I do think that a Brahman cow, in comparison to kind of at least the typical cows strung across the middle part of the United States, is taxed quite a bit harder in her ability to breed back on time, strictly just because of that 10 extra days. So does that affect any kind of your breeding decisions? Do you think we need to select for decreased gestation length? I don't know. Is that an improvement factor if we try and peel a few days off of gestation length in our cow herd? Do we need to turn bulls out earlier? We talked about some of these things, and so I guess let's just talk through some of that. Brandon?
Yeah, I think we should have started with some kind of disclaimer saying we are not animal scientists. This is just observations of being around cattle for the better part of our lives, and especially when we're responsible for making them pay for themselves so we can stay in business because this is our livelihood. You're not relying on an outside income source, so these cows have to work. And what are the traits that make them work? But getting to this, that's one thing about Brahmins versus 283 to 285 gestation length. We're looking at 291 or longer.
Yeah.
So that puts them behind the 8 ball, or I guess in a handicap in a race to breed back like they need to. I do feel like if we can keep those cows backing up or breeding, we're going in the right direction, because those cows have to stay productive. A lot of the places we're sending these cattle, they palpate twice a year. Open cows leave, and so the producers that we're supplying seed stock to have to be able to rely on our genetics to fit their management as well. So, because if that cow's not trailing a calf, or she comes up open, she's gone, no excuses. So we have to make sure we take care of that. But that 10 days, I think, is something we need to pay attention to. Like I said, I don't know whether it is, if we need to work on backing that up and shorten it, or how we're going to, that's just something we have to deal with, and it's a given, and you got to manage your way around it.
Elevate your herd with the finest Brahman heifers from BRC Ranch. Perhaps you need to replace ranch heifers, or you're sourcing elite show heifers and donor prospects. BRC Ranch understands your passion for Brahmins. We feel the same. Building a strong foundation is essential for long-term success, and we invite you to see our exceptional Brahman heifers in person. Schedule a visit to our ranch by going online to brcutrer.com and selecting a suitable time slot. That's brcutrer.com.
We know that there's tremendous variation in it. We know that AI, the cows that we artificially inseminate, which tends to be, I think right now, of 3 ways you can produce a calf, AI has got to be the one that's decreasing at the fastest rate, not because fewer people are AI and cows, but because there's so many more calves that are born by embryo transfer, specifically that come from IVF, the new school lower drug application programs that are out there. But the Brahman calves born to the Brahman cows, we know there's a tremendous variation. I think the issue is very few folks own enough cows that we have a known breeding date or a pretty good supposition about when a bull mounted or when we AI'd to get an idea. So I think we're backing into the cows that have the shorter gestation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's pretty easy. If the cow had one of the younger calves in her group when you put the bulls out, and she calved in the first third of that calf crop, odds are she wasn't a 305, and she probably wasn't a 295. So she's probably one that you need to mark and keep. The cows that bother me are the cows in a 60 to 75 day calving season that kind of started. They started at the start of it They had a mid-February calf. The next year, they were 21 days later. The next year, they were 21 days later. And by the third year, they worked their way out of being a spring calving cow, and then they kick open to your fall calving cow herd.
So basically, that heifer, instead of being genetically predisposed to have a shorter gestation, she was just lucky that her cycle fell at the right time, the first time for her to get bred at the early part of the calving season. But she's basically backing up consistently.
Instead of every 12 months, she's every 15 months.
And I think there's a lot of luck involved with getting any open heifer bred the very first time. I think the skill comes with how you manage her. And I honestly, when I look at, since we've taken these cows to South Texas 8-9 years ago, the biggest thing that I've seen is, with a few exceptions, the bigger the ping pong in condition, the less likely they are. And a thin cow with a big calf sucking on her is less likely to breed back, or so we think. We had a slug of cows that calved basically between San Antonio and Houston last year. It's rained not very much down in South Texas since then. Turned the bull back loose on those cows. Didn't even bother palpating them. Most of them were first and second calf heifers. They had no concern with palpating them. Dadgum, if on 365, 370, 380 to 400 days, we get 2/3 of them just start dropping calves out of the wind. They never even built a whole lot of that condition that they lost with last year's calf. And here they are pretty close to ideal where you have. Well, okay, I didn't really fix a lot of the environment on those cows. So if I'm looking around and picking my donor cows, where do I need to be looking? I probably need to be looking at the most pedigree favorable of those 6 cows that I had that calved back. I probably need to be looking at the one that I like the pedigree on the most, and that I liked her mama the most. And she probably needs to be the next cow that I just aspirate the mess out of, because she found a way around. She's not necessarily a easy fleshing year-round frame condition score 5 kind of cow, but she proved maybe she would have been had I not let her get the absolute dog mess sucked out of her with her very, very first calf as a 29, calving at 28, 29 months of age. At which point I've already made Mr. Pratt mad because I turned the bull out with her before she had her second birthday. But when you look at the fertility in those Pratt cows out in Arizona, dude's onto something. Not question my mind. The man's onto something.
But do you think, Jimmy, if you'd have found a way to improve the environment through means that we've talked about, aka supplemental feeding, that you could set those cows up for success?
If I'd have fed her between the time that she palpated 2 months safe in calf till for the next 4 months, that was my window to take care of her. Because once she gets in that third trimester, you want to slow down, because all of us get told, all you're going to do is feed yourself into a big calf, and now you're going to have dystocia issues and birth weight issues. And I heard that's a little bit less of a factor than it is for lots of folks, but probably you're going back, maybe it's the 75 days after she calves that are your most important days of the year, and probably, for me at least, it's those 90 days after we palpate her where I can take care of her and maybe get a little bit of flesh put back on her.
So
before I'm feeding a baby as well.
So we talked about that the 70 days post-calving, and then you're saying the 90 days after her palpating pregnant. So those would be the 160 days of the year that are really the most important from a management standpoint. And those are maybe some of the days that you probably should focus on. Go ahead, Brandon. I've seen you've been shuffling through your calving book, so you've got some kind of ammo in the tank, I think.
So I was thinking, just based on what you just said there, you got to get her bred to calve 365 within 70 days after calving, which also might be the best time to do within that window that you mentioned between 70 days after calving and 90 days after being bred back, because during that time, her calf that she's nursing on her side is doing nothing but growing and getting bigger and requiring more nutrition as he grows. So I think there's a sweet spot somewhere in that 70 days while her calf that she's currently nursing is still small enough and not pulling her down too much, where maybe her first cycle back in, she might be the most fertile she's going to be. And if you have the bull the bull or the AI technician there at the right time, you can get that booger bred back. So maybe a case study here, just from this past fall calving season. I had, at the time when we AI'd, I probably had one of the best pregnancy rates I ever had at an AI. And in this particular group, we had 10 cows that we set up. And those cows, first cow would have calved. That's what I was looking up in my book. The first cow in that group would have calved, September the 19th. Last calf in that particular group that we did would have calved October the 1st. I set those cows up to AI on 11/26. So that's going to give us a calving date of 9/12, if I'm not mistaken, which would be, what did I say the oldest calf in that group was?
You were 69, you were 58 to 69 days on the calf age of the day you set them up.
Yes. First cow, her calf was born 9/19. Last cow was born October the 1st, and there was 10 cows that fell in there. We AI'd them on 11/26 for an expected calving date of 9/12. So every one of those cows
moved back.
And of the 10, we had 9 of them get pregnant on AI, which was fantastic. And so every single one of those cows is going to back up anywhere from 4 days to 30 days. We were able to push those cows in a positive direction on getting shorter calving intervals and all that. And so I sat back to think, what were the factors going into that mating time that set us up for that much success? And so, one, we fall within that short time where a calf is still young on their side. They're not requiring as much nutrition as, say, they would a 3-month-old calf that's really getting his motor behind him and sucking a lot of milk on that cow and really pulling her down. We fell within that. We also fell before that December 10th date, where Dr. Long said the majority of Brahman cows shut down reproductively due to weather and day length. And we also had those cows right during that time when your summer grasses fall off and your natural. And this was also on no winter grass either. So I had to take that into consideration. No ryegrass, no oats. But during that time, there's a little spike in clover. Mm-hmm. So that taking that into consideration as well, I'm trying to think of some of the other things. Those cows were in good shape. They were we had liquid feed for them as a supplementation because coming out of summer grasses are dying. They're going dormant. They required a little bit decent minerals. And also, when we set those cows up, I think we looked in the Farmer's Almanac to find the best day to breed farm animals, because this might be another topic for a podcast, but moon phase. So, there's a lot to that. You know, you always hear the old timers say castrate by this time of the month or during this moon phase, or dehorn during this moon phase. But if you start looking through that Farmer's Almanac, there's also a best day to breed farm animals. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's throw that into the mix. And by kind of navigating all that stuff, we set those cows up for success, and we got 9 out of the 10 on first service AI after calving within 70 days. So anywhere from 45 to 70 days on calving, and that was fantastic. So in that case, I think was a lot environment, whether it's man-made environment through management or environment through just the natural being around there. We set those cows up for success. So that got me thinking as we go further and really trying to, I guess, form a strategy each and every breeding season to how can we help these cows be successful as possible.
Yeah. So just to kind of put a complete thought to this. So we have kind of decided that it helps to get a cow. We're trying to get them bred back that first cycle back after calving. Okay. And so we had the opportunity, me and you, of cedering those cows, getting them set up and AIing them. Okay. But for a lot of programs, that's not an option.
Mm-hmm.
But I can put a cedar in.
There you go.
And
Well,
I can give shots.
And then, but the kicker is old conventional wisdom when guys are turning out bulls. How many operations do you think don't even have a bull out when that first heat comes around?
I'd say a whole bunch. I mean, take, for example, right here in this county, there's a hard and fast rule that bulls go out this day of the year. Bulls get picked up this day of the year because that's the way we've been doing it for 75 and 80 years. And that's just, everybody knows when those days are coming. And that's when you turn bulls out. And
so we've already missed the first opportunity to get her bred and possibly the best opportunity to get her bred.
Potentially. So,
well, you let in your point, Brandon, about when it's not linear. That the demand that calf puts on that cow is not linear from the day he is born until the day
exactly.
he is
It's not even kind of.
And it's pretty easy. He's pretty easy on her for the first month because little Joker doesn't weigh much.
100 pounds.
He doesn't weigh much. X% of his body weight a day ain't a whole lot. No, you're exactly right. My dad's plan for 43 years in Sealy was to have the first calves born around the last week of February, but not to turn the bulls back out again until May 15th. I'm basically running, but he was mortified when he came down to Campbellton 2 or 3 times and saw that I had a bull out basically every time that he came. But we're not the Midwest. We're dealing with a different animal. And back to Brandon's point is I hate to think that given how hard it is for her to do this, that we'd ever be in her way for any reason, the least of which just because that's the way it's always been done. That might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
mm-hmm.
And yet we do it. We all do it. We've all got little hang-ups. We have traditions and the rest of it. But we've also heard, and we haven't even talked about this, how many times have we gone to a show, a kid's come up to us and says, hey, we're trying to get her bred AI'd, but we can't get it done. What do we tell them? Well, the same thing our daddies and our grandpas told them. Go home, put her with a bull. There's a pheromone angle there. There's God is they are wonderful and magical creatures, and there's a lot of magic to them. But when that bull is there and that bull is sniffing around, that bull's acting interested, there is no telling what biological processes are. And we have let the bulls completely off in this entire discussion. But if you're going to breed
that'd shoot us in another direction. Let's put a pin in that one.
We're going to put a pin and we're going to come back. And the next time we're going to talk about the bull's impact on this deal with the bull contract. When you're AIing instead of doing the other, you can deliver a consistent quantity of equivalent quantity semen.
Yeah.
And you're getting it through the cervix every time. But there's difference too. That's those big old fat heifers get involved with that deal. Thickened that cervix up. You've made it harder for either of the artificial or natural cervix to be effective with what we're doing here.
I feel like it's harder to breed a fat one or a man-made fat one that's been fed grain. It's harder to get her bred than it is one that's too thin, because people always say you can always pull weight off of them, but it's a different kind of deal because there's still a lot of internal fat that's around that you don't get to see. But if at a low point in body condition and you get her up to a higher and an increasing plane of nutrition, boom, she's going to get bred. But that one that you got to suck back, she's fat already, which is bad for getting bred, but then you're putting her through nutritional stress to get her where she needs to be. It's really tough to get those fat cattle bred.
And you think that this is a buzzword. This is a big buzzword here, but do you think we've affected the epigenetics of those cattle when we run them through a situation like that and then just completely wreck the future of them? I mean, and the crazy thing, and I don't know why I even sent us down this rabbit hole because I know it's going to take us in a direction, but not only are we affecting her, but in the process, we're affecting the embryos that are inside of her body already So you could ultimately affect 3 generations in their productivity by the way you handle that one cow individually. It's interesting.
And the way we love to talk about longevity, we might be screwing things up for 40 years.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Talk about adding pressure to your
Boys, we better think about what we do.
I tell you, but going back to that management issue of turning cows out and turning bulls out certain times a year, or AI in certain times a year, because that's the way we've always done it. There have been preg check days where I wanted to go home and vomit just because terrible preg rates. And then you sit back and think, what everybody said, oh, these sorry old cows, this and that. But then when you start evaluating, what could I have done to make that situation better? One, did I breed them at the right time? To calve at the right time? To breed back at the right time? One, is my bull any good? Of course, we'll come back to that one. So take this for an example. Say for years and years and years, we turned out bulls May the 25th for March 1st calves. So this year, before we turn out bulls, I'm going to set these cows up to calve on March 1st. Well, let's say March 10th, because let's get ourselves past the Houston Livestock Show, where we can be there to watch these cows calve. We backed them up from that May the 25th to June the 6th to get us past Houston. Instead of turning the bull out at that time, we set them up to AI. We AI them, we get 50% pregnancy rate. And then from there on out, the bull covers them for the next 60 days before we pick him up, say August the 4th. So then, by that time, from the time those cows start calving, which will be March the 10th, roughly, estimated, to when they finish, which would be May the 25th, roughly, we roll around to next year. Those AI cows are already a little bit ahead of the curve on when you're going to traditionally turn bulls out. So they could potentially, say you get ready to set those cows up and breed them again May the 25th. Well, they might have already cycled May the 20th and you missed those and you got to wait another 20 days. So those cows that calved on time are actually backing up. And then the later calving cows just keep getting later and later and later. So you have a lot of that can be making sure we get those cows bred early as possible, maybe even rethinking traditional wisdom and turning bulls out earlier. Try to AI them earlier. Sometimes I wonder if you cedar them earlier than you think you ought to, you can jumpstart some things. And if you can get that cedar in them before they're actually ready themselves to come back into heat, you jumpstart it. And if they don't breed that first time back, they've been jumpstarted to breed back the very next heat and keep them up in the early part of that calving season.
When you told the story about last fall,
mm-hmm.
That's the first thing that went through my head is I don't think they come stamped on their head from the Lord with exactly what date. That's it, because we know we can affect it. We know we can starve her to death and she'll never come in.
Mm-hmm.
We know we can get her too fat and she'll never come in. So there's got to be if you can affect it in the negative, you have to be able to affect it in the positive. And whether it's just that little shot of taking that confused endocrine system and reminding it what its main job is. You know, it's not like a wives' tale if I never palpate because that makes all the calves abort. We're not doing anything really to put her behind the 8-ball. Not doing anything at all to put her behind the 8-ball. And you're not stealing calves. You're just, we're stealing calves is what we're doing. Because in theory, if you back her up a month every year, once 12 years have passed, it's like a gas station rewards program. You got your free Coke out of it. I don't think it's possible to do that because eventually we back up and we get right back up against our December 10th through mid-February issue that's again. But let's face it, most of us are not interested in trying to back them up a month every year. That we would consider ourselves, Lou Gehrig, luckiest man on the face of the earth if we get that done. If we just pick the day of the year that we want to calve them on and hammer them and have them come back and calve within a week either side of that every year. you're in a better spot, because what do you get when you get that? You get more consistency in your calf crop, across your calf crop. Now you're actually at a point that in one calf crop you can actually have fewer contemporary groups that are involved, and your data all of a sudden means more information, or data into information at that point where you can act on it.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Cutrer. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.